off, and then I'll kind of jump in if you're okay with that here and there.
Great. My apologies, everybody. Best laid plans, how that always works. I will have, if I'm going to put this up here, I'm not going to be able to see the chat. So if you guys want to flag me down and say something when there's something in the chat. So to start out, here we go. Where's my mouse? There we go. So objectives, we're going to try and hit all of these today. Science of saving seeds and how it all works, the types of seeds that are best, some different strategies, and then the challenges. So, of course, as Geoff was saying, that there are a variety of different seeds that are protected by the Plant Variety Protection Act. And there is such a thing as seed sovereignty. And this is something that we see because of the genetic just complexity that goes into a lot of the breeds and varieties of seeds that we see. So not all seeds are savable. And we are going to get into that a little bit as well. Geoff, anything to add here?
No, other than as an educator, it's really hard to not like sell seeds because the trademarks are out there too. So there are a lot of rules behind it. So if money ever exchanges hands with seeds, well, it's not the label is the law, but the trademark is the law. I'll say it like that.
Absolutely. All right, so the science of saving seeds comes from a lot of different ideas of how to create new varieties from existing varieties. And there's a couple different types of ways to save that reproductive material. Some plants are self-pollinating. So we see like corn is a self-pollinating plant. The plant has both female and male reproductive organs and the pollen will fall from the tassel down to the rest of the plant. Cross-pollination requires a male and a female. So those types of pollination are more complex, and that's where you see a lot of times with your fruit trees, you need to have a male and a female in order for that to pollinate. Then we also have open pollination versus hybrid plants. Now, the thing with hybrid plants is that they are produced similarly to a mule. A mule is, or a donkey is a type of hybrid. So that cannot reproduce past that point. We have two parents, and then the offspring is asexual. So it does not have the ability to reproduce. Now, what that means is that they are genetically that way. That does not mean that you won't be able to save those seeds and plant them, and you may get something the next year, but it may not be the exact same thing that you actually grew and saved the seeds from. We see this a lot with pumpkins. We have a lot of hybrid varieties. And if you save those seeds and you plant them, you may get something that looked like one of the two parents rather than the actual child that you did save seed from. Geoff?
No, I appreciate the mule comparison because a lot of times people will think I had a prize-winning tomato or whatever plant it was, but you could plant 10 of the seeds, but those offspring could be 10 different plants in terms of what their traits are. So just be aware of that. Can't remember in the biggest example is you cannot plant an apple tree from the seed of an apple. You've got to cut a branch off and have that same parent plant. I'm not saying to do that with a mule, that's not going to work, but with the apples, like in different genetic varieties. So for Honeycrisp example, you have to get a Honeycrisp tree, find a branch, and find a way to graft that and move forward. I thought that was fascinating because we grew up, you put a seed in the ground and it's going to grow. But with the genetics, I thought that was a very interesting point of this
It's
conversation.
It's also the interesting part of the grape industry. So if you're not familiar with the grape industry, grape vines, the actual plants themselves, are most commonly grafted. So the trunk of the tree, the root, is actually one type of a plant, and then the grape variety is actually grafted into that. And that is how they get those types of varieties of grapes. You don't plant grape seeds to get grapes. So that's an interesting industry component that comes into that as well that I find fascinating.
And just to kind of expand onto it, we're talking in the lens of fruit and vegetable and stuff. Think about weeds Mention dandelions. Think of there are crops in the agricultural world like Palmer amaranth or ragweed. They produce, hundreds of thousands of seeds. Genetically, there's going to be a chance that one of them produces a trait that works really well for the weed, but does not work well for the farmer. And you eventually get some resistant weed or something that grows faster. Or again, the traits and the reproduction of it all with genetics, I find fascinating.
Absolutely. I want to go back. Okay, one more thing I wanted to mention before I go on to the next topic is that um, how we get those hybrids is a very, very complex process. When you have self and cross-pollinating specimen, basically, it takes a lot of hands-on things to get to that hybrid. So it means taking the pollen from one variety that you really like the trait of, like Geoff said, and putting it specifically on the female part of the other plant that you want to get that variety from. A lot of times in commercial things, when we see new varieties, especially new varieties of apple, new varieties of corn, new varieties of many fruits and vegetables, those varieties are years in the making. I'm talking 10 plus years. So very, very interesting in
I
the
was going to
science.
add on to that. I was going to add on to that. And you might have mentioned it. The giant pumpkin people, it's not a cult, but you can spend a pretty penny on a seed that has come from one of the giant pumpkins because and if you guys want to do some homework who are attending today, there are people who the work they do to prevent cross-pollination because they want specific genetics is extremely meticulous.
Yep. All right. So when it comes to harvesting and storing, these 3 points, timing, disease prevention, and storage, are the absolute key. So how you select your seeds, it all makes a difference. So timing, you have to select these seeds and you have to harvest them before the seeds are completely dead on the ground. So what that means is we are not going to wait for seeds to be completely on the ground for us to harvest them. We're going to harvest them and make sure we are storing them appropriately so that we still keep that germplasm alive. Disease prevention. Obviously, don't take seeds from plants that have had a lot of disease issues that year. That goes into the genetics. And then storing them makes a huge difference as well. We want to make sure that we are storing them appropriately. And that's what we're going to get into here today. So vegetables. So this is a little bit of what we were talking about with the differences in hybrid and heirloom. Now, hybrid are those like we were talking about. They have been bred specifically to be what they are, excuse me, and they are not going to reproduce a plant that is identical to the hybrid. It is going to produce a plant that is identical to the hybrid's parents, okay? Heirloom plants are open pollinated seeds, and these are the ones that you want to save. These are the ones that people have been saving seeds for generations and generations. These have not been genetically, crossed with other things. This is what it is, and you're going to get that time and time and time again. All right. So, saving your seeds. There's a lot of things that come around with how to save seeds. You can save the seeds from the fruit. You can absolutely do that. You can harvest the seeds from a tomato. You can harvest the seeds from a lot of these different things, scrape them out, dry them out. You still do not have a 100% success rate with that. There's always going to be an issue, and you are never going to get 100% germination from when you're harvesting your seeds from fruit and you're saving those because there's always just too many things that go wrong. And in that process, there's a lot of different varieties of people who are going to tell you, you need to do this, you need to do that. When you're saving seeds from the packet, that means that, like in the picture here, you have seeds in the packet and they should be heirloom seeds that you are saving. And maybe that means you plant part of that packet this year, you save some of them back, and then you plant more the next year from the packet and some from the ones that you saved from the plant, and you see what you get there. Geoff?
Yep. I agree with all of that. In terms of saving your seeds, you had mentioned only planting a few seeds at a time. Please keep things labeled as a rule. If I open a seed packet, once it's opened, I do put it in a Ziploc baggie so that it doesn't, I take that back. Most of the time I put it in a Ziploc bag with that seed packet so I know exactly what that is. At the same time, I believe I saw in the chat box that someone had a bag of surprise seeds. I've got an old popcorn tin that at the bottom has a lot of different seeds that I have no idea what they are. So keep things labeled. And there should be on the label too when those were tested, different things. But yes, I agree with all those. And the labor intensive, if you ever tried to collect the tomato seeds, my goodness, it takes forever.
Good on you if you're able to productively do that. I also want to mention too, I don't know if you guys ever if you remember this whole phenomenon where China was sending us seeds in the mail and everybody got packages that were labeled as like crazy things, or maybe it was a piece of jewelry you didn't order and it came with seeds. And that was a whole phenomenon at one point. And those were collected and taken to a seed lab and they tried to identify them. Everyone was convinced that China was sending us invasive species. It was a whole thing. So that I think also plays into this a little bit as well. Don't plant a seed that you don't know what it is, okay? If you don't know what it is, plant it in a control environment if you do need to plant it. If you just can't help yourself, plant it in a very controlled environment and make sure that it is what you think it is before you take it out of a controlled environment. And by controlled environment, I mean in a greenhouse, in a pot, something like that, where it cannot be shared or spread with pollen and things that's as it matures and grows.
Abby, I'm glad you brought that up because for those who are in extension, they know this. Our supervisors very clearly said directly to the ag educators, do not plant these. And if they hadn't said
Yes.
that, I was going to try to do it, but they said no, no, don't. We're not going to take chances. So they took care of it
Yep.
on the campus side.
Yep. All right, so vegetables that are relatively easy to save. This says easy to save. That's not saying that it is an easy process. It means that they have better viability than others. So for tomatoes, you can see the instructions here. You're going to scoop out those seeds and you're going to soak them in a jar of water. And by soaking them, that actually allows you to be able to separate those seeds from that gel that they exist in. If you've ever opened up a tomato, you know that there's a lot of jelly, gooky stuff in there. So soaking them in a jar of water, then you are able to pull out just the seeds. You don't want the gel with them, and you can dry them out on a paper towel or a screen before you are prepared to save them. Peppers, those are a lot easier. You scoop out those seeds. You need to have them stay on the plant until they get a little bit wrinkly. So past the point of when you would eat them, but before the point that they are rotten. So before they fall to the ground, they still need to be attached to the plant. But when the plant gets a little bit wrinkly, then you're going to take them, cut them open like you normally would, scoop those seeds out and let them completely dry. Now make sure that they are separated from each other. You don't want entire huge clumps of seed. But let them dry completely on a paper towel. All right, beans and peas. You're going to let these dry until they were totally brown and the seeds rattle. So similar to how we harvest soybeans in the field. And then you're going to let them get good and dry. We don't want any moisture to be inside that seed as we save it. And then we're going to store them from there. So super easy for beans, but we're going to leave them on the plant. All right. So let herbs produce stalk with seed. So that means letting them go to bolt. And same with lettuce here after this, we're going to let them go to bolt, which means that they are producing flowers and they are then trying to reproduce themselves. So let them go to bolt, collect those seeds. And actually with herbs, you are going to take the entire plant and dry it completely because herb seeds are teeny, teeny, tiny. So we need to dry the entire plant completely. And then later on, we will separate those seeds once the plant is completely dry. It's going to be a lot easier then. With lettuce, you're going to grow it to the bolt stage, gather the seeds from those the little flowers that pop up. You can rub them in between your fingers like a dandelion and let the seeds dry completely. We're only going to keep the seeds, but you are going to let them go to bolt similar to the herbs.
One thing I had to mention is when we say bolt, usually you only use the word bolt when you're talking about a vegetable or a weed. but we call it on everything else, you just call it going to flower.
Mhm.
So when it bolts, that just means its reproductive processes are happening. So that was a something that Rosie Lerner, for those of you who remember her, if it's a flower, it flowers. If it's a vegetable or a weed, it bolts.
Yep. All right, ones that are more difficult to save. And I know as some of you were mentioning in the chat prior to us getting started that some of you do save your squash seeds. A lot of these vine crops are just a lot harder to save them because they spend so much time with there's a lot of different varieties that are out there. It's a lot harder to get a true heirloom melon, cucumber, squash, and pumpkin just because of the processes that that do happen. So biennials are also a lot harder to do just because their life cycles are different and different than we're used to. Sweet corn is another one of those things. It's very difficult to do that because heirloom sweet corn varieties are just very hard to find. So well, from these, it's going to be easier for you to buy new seed. All right. The ones on the last slide, it's a lot more common for those seeds to get saved. Tomatoes, especially, beans, especially. I've met some people that have had the same heirloom seeds that they've been growing for 10, 15, 20 years. Some of them that have seeds from their grandparent. So I have met people like that before, and I am all for it. Good on ya. I personally do not have the patience to do some of that. Here and there, absolutely, but that is a commitment, and I am absolutely so proud of the people who are able to carry that heirloom variety forward. Geoff, do you have anything here?
No, I agree 100% with you. Abby, I mean, if there's something that I enjoy growing, I'm a sucker for a catalog. I can't say which one, but I love a good seed catalog because if I have a tomato where it, gosh darn it, I grew it in the garden and it had powdery mildew or something else going on, I'm going to try a new variety. And if that one works well, I'm going to write the name down and I'm just going to continue buying that seed. So, but once I find one, I usually stick with it.
All right, so considerations for drying these seeds. As you can see in these pictures, you can see that there is the one thing that is the absolute nemesis of saving seeds, and that is moisture. So as you can see these seeds in this picture, one thing we want to make sure is that we get them nice and dry. Dry is the name of the game. Dry is the absolute end all be all for saving your seeds. If you get moisture in there, that is going to freeze, that is going to cause mold, it's going to throw off the seed saving, and it's really going to throw off your germination. So make sure we're getting these completely dry before we are saving them and putting them in our airtight containers. So once we do have them dried down, and that can be through paper towels, some people have screens that they do. I don't know about putting them in a dehydrator. I think that is a little bit too far for the things. Now, you guys may have better experiences with that than me. But once we get those seeds dried down, we are going to put them in an airtight container, whether that be a Ziploc bag, whether that be a jar, whether that be a Rubbermaid to-go container or leftover container or something like that. That is where we are going to store them. We're going to store somewhere with a regulated temperature. It doesn't have to be in a refrigerator, but it needs to have a regulated temperature. Think a root cellar, think a something that has a very consistent temperature and may or may not be power dependent. If I lost my words for a second there, but something that has a regulated temperature all year long. And then you're going to leave it alone. We're not going to open it up. Every time you open it up, you're introducing moisture. And every time you do that, your germ rate goes down. So don't open them up. All
I was
right.
going to add to that. Oh, sorry, Abby.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, there were some folks who did try the dehydrator. Actually, a couple folks, it did not work. It actually got, even though they watched it carefully, it denatured the seeds. So that germplasm you were talking about, it just wiped it out. So you
Yep.
can try
Yep.
it, but you have to be real careful.
Absolutely. So as I said, moisture equals mold. So moisture is the enemy here. So as you can see in this picture, we have properly labeled seeds, and we need to make sure that they have that temperature consistency. Now, something to think about. If we have seeds that we have stored in a root cellar, does that mean that the temperature is the same all year long? No. Does that mean that there are not fluctuations in temperature similar to opening and closing a refrigerator door? Yes. If you store seeds in your refrigerator, you want to store them in the back of your refrigerator or your freezer. You want to store them in the back so that they are not affected by the temperature fluctuations that come from opening and closing the door. Okay. And that's something that is the key. So warmth will lead to mold, so we want to make sure we're keeping them nice and cool, but that consistent temperature is the most important. All right. Organization. If you save a bunch of seeds and you do that and you put them in storage, and then the next year you can't remember which is in which bag, that is no help to you. Because if you can't tell the difference apart and you haven't labeled them, then you have no idea what you're growing. Now, another thing to keep in mind too is if you see it in these bags, they do have a small bag of desiccant in here. So that is a moisture absorber. That's a great idea if this is something that you have had issues with in the past, or if you were unsure completely of your ability to dry them down 100%. These desiccants are often, they're the little silica gels. They come in a lot of things. They usually come in like sometimes clothing that you order will have them, or backpacks, or I don't even know, medications a lot of times come with desiccant. So you can also buy these, but most of the time you're just throwing them out anyway. So if you start saving those are good things to put with your seeds to make sure that they're absorbing all the moisture.
I was
Geoff?
gonna say, yeah, you find them in beef jerky too.
Beef jerky, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
And then have you ever bought those packets? I don't know, is that something you could just look up silica on Amazon or something like that?
You can, because a
Okay.
lot of people who are like small businesses have to buy them. So you can buy them. It's
Okay.
just, why buy them when you get them for free?
Right.
All right, so the storage life of seeds. So this is something that a lot of people don't take into consideration, because it doesn't matter if you have worked really hard and collected these seeds and you have harvested them and you have them in your airtight container. Even at that point, that doesn't mean that they are good to go for the rest of your life. Okay, they still have a shelf life. The seeds that you buy in the grocery store, they still have a shelf life. Does that mean that they won't germinate? Not necessarily. It means that they will not have as good of a germination rate, that the seed may be compromised in some way. It either may or may not sprout, or it may sprout and not produce. So that's things to keep in mind when you see the shelf life of these seeds. So this chart actually shows the seeds and the life that they have as they are being stored. Okay, so corn, onion, parsley, parsnip, pepper, okra. These are ones that we don't want to keep for a long term. Okay, we want to save those, use those, save them again. Okay, these are things that we want to do on a continual basis. All right, and then you can see the intermediate ones there in the middle. They will last a few more years than the short-lived seeds, but that doesn't mean that they're good forever. If you have seeds that you've had for more than 5 years, then you probably ought to just go ahead and throw them away, because as you can see on the right, we can keep seeds for 4 to 5 years. Past that, there's no guarantees. All right. So if you have seeds that you have had, like I said, for over 5 years, or you think it may be 5 years, but it's probably been longer, they're probably not going to do anything, even if you do plant them. Geoff?
No, I agree. And so the longer you go, so and I think you mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. When you label your seeds that you're saving, put the year that they were
Yeah.
germinated. You've got to put the name, you've got to put the year. I will still put seeds out if they are 2 to 3 years old. If they get to 4 to 5 years old, I'm either going to throw them away, or I might just say, you know what, I'm going to see what comes up. I might put down 100 seeds and only get 2 or 3. Okay, that's fine, but I'm not going to count on those for my garden for harvest the longer they're in storage. So the other thing I'm going to kind of again bring in sort of full picture. There are weed seeds like curly dock and different things that you can find. they do studies where those stinking seeds will last in the soil for almost 50 years. So it's like, why can't we keep the seeds we want for longer? But
Right.
that's just kind of the nature of the beast. So just be aware,
Yep.
make sure label name and date that they those seeds were produced.
It's usually how it works, right? The Captain Americas end up being the seeds you don't want. If we could keep the seeds we do want frozen in time forever, then that would be very helpful for us.
Oh yeah, I agree.
All right, so what we're doing after we keep them. So the next year when you go back and you pull your seeds out of storage, it's very important that you test for your viability and you test germination, because if you don't, you're just going to be wasting your time. Testing for viability involves making sure that your seeds actually have that your seeds are live. I guess I'm going to say it that way, that your seeds are live. Most of the time, seeds that float are going to be dry hulls, and they are not live seed. Okay, so seeds that sink to the bottom of a bowl of water or a jar of water are going to be viable. Now, does that mean that they are going to germinate? Not necessarily. That just means that they have a higher percentage, or they're more likely to germinate. Okay. Testing your germination, just like you did in high school biology class. Place 10 seeds on a wet paper towel, roll it up, put it in a Ziploc bag, store it in a dark, warm place, and keep that towel wet or damp. Continue dampening your towel, and then check for germination. So you can continue to open that up, check it, especially after a few days. Every seed type has a different germination time. So sometimes it's 5 days, sometimes it's 10 days, sometimes it's 14 days. So just continue checking that. And within the first week, you should start seeing the signs of germination, and you should be starting to get some sprouts. Now, why do you use 10? You use 10 because that is a general kind of way to test for a percentage. All right. So if you have 10 seeds and only 9 germinate, you have a 90% germination rate. Okay. So simple math there.
And that's something too where I would do like collect enough seeds where 10 seeds is not going to make or break the bank.
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh, and I don't know, Abby, I've done this a couple times with my seeds. If you put, so I will put the seeds in a paper towel and I'll actually put them in a Ziploc bag. If you do that, they're going to smell like garbage. So just be
Yep.
aware to not put too much water in. But for the sake of, if you're traveling around and using them, you can use the Ziploc baggies. But I did a presentation like this up in Kendallville, and I'm like, I'm going to show these guys the germination because you can see what's working. They smell terrible. They didn't ruin the
Yep.
presentation, but it did make a difference. There are some folks, and this is more of an anecdote, where they wanted to germinate the seeds. The paper towel, they actually rooted into it. But when they tried it with coffee filters, they could actually get some of those seeds and reuse them. So try some different things.
Oh, there you go.
If I'm testing seed for this thing like you're describing, Abby, I'm probably going to throw these away. But some people want to use everything, so dealer's choice on that.
Absolutely. Yep, for sure. And the key there is to place them in an open Ziploc bag. If you use a Ziploc bag, don't seal it, because then they won't be able to get the air that they need. So key point there, an open Ziploc bag. One thing I do want to mention too before this is, and we might cover it here in flowers as well, is that there are different things that plants need in order to germinate. So sometimes there are vegetables or flowers. Most commonly we see it in flowers, so it's probably going to be mentioned here in a little bit. But there are some that may need stratification. There may need to be different environments that they need to be in order to germinate. All right, so flowers, seeds, bulbs, and more. So harvesting from annual flowers, different from perennial flowers. These are things that we are going to let them dry completely on the plant. So doesn't mean you're going to cut those flowers and bring them inside and save the whole flower. It means you're going to leave them on the plant for them to dry. So you're going to collect your dried flower heads off of the plant themselves and put them in a brown paper bag and let them dry down. Again, dry, dry, dry. That's the name of the game. All right. Center of the flower head is usually the best place to start looking for the best seeds, because those are the ones that have the most nutrition when you're thinking about the reproduction of the flower. So your mature seeds are going to be the large, thick seeds that are in the center. okay? All the other seeds, great, keep them, but they may not do as well as those bigger seeds, okay? And these are for annual flowers. So easy annuals that you can save seeds from. You can see those listed here. Marigolds are pretty easy. Zinnias, and then also Snapdragon. I've done a lot with coneflowers, but they are actually perennials. However, they are very easy to keep seed from. So coneflowers are one of those that it's very easy to do, and they actually will self-seed. So you don't even have to keep them. They will self-seed. But if you want them in a new place, then definitely save some of those seeds and plant them in a different location.
I've had good luck with moss roses or something like that where I didn't intend for them to regrow where they did, but they turned out okay. It was nice.
All right, plants with bulbs. So these plants, so we have a lot of them here, especially your crocus, daffodils, your gladiolus, you've got your tulips and elephant ears. There are some places that these thrive and you can have them in the ground forever and they will come back and come back and come back. Now, what happens when you want to plant them in a new location? Well, you're going to need to save those bulbs and plant them in a new spot. So hardy plants like daffodils and crocuses, they are going to be the ones that come back every year. So, sorry, you can replant them after dividing them. This is something too that you see a lot of when you have old homesteads. Along the sides of the roads, you can see where an old homestead was because they usually had daffodils planted. So when you see daffodils growing in a straight line in nature, it's because humans put them there. Nature has no straight lines. So when you see that, it's always a good indication that there was a homestead there at some point. But you can take these and you're going to divide them for your hardy plants like daffodils and crocuses. Divide them, pull them out, separate the bulbs, and then we're going to let them dry. Less hardy bulbs like your dahlias and begonias need to be stored each winter. They are not going to overwinter. I had some plants like this that I would do this with, and I had relatively good luck with it. And was able to actually save some of the bulbs from plants that I got around Easter, just from friends or whatever. And so I was able to save those as well. So process for that, when you're digging up your bulbs, don't damage them. Try not to cut into them with your shovel. If you're going to dig them up, make sure you're digging plenty of a large enough space around the plant that you're not going to damage those bulbs. The bulbs themselves are the reproductive organ of that plant. So you want to make sure that we are not slicing them or that we are not damaging the skins of them in any way. We're going to try not to wash them off because we don't want to introduce moisture to them that they don't already have. You can wash them off if they're super dirty, but for the most part, if you just dig them up and let them dry as you dug them up, just dig the whole thing up and sit it in a bucket or on the concrete floor of your garage, or if you want to lay newspaper down or whatever you want to do. But if you let those dry, the dirt will dry up. It will all shake off. It will come off very easily. So don't worry about washing them. Shake off any of that remaining dirt or any other plants that came with them. You're going to store them. Now, a lot of people have different ways that they store them. You can see in this picture, some of them are in brown paper bags. Some of them are in those like onion bags. Some people will use nylon, so your pantyhose, things like that. Something where they can still get some airflow. They're not completely sealed, but it's enough that they are contained and that they're not just floating around. Sometimes it's important to keep those bulbs separated. So you may want to put some peat moss or some kind of a divider between them, or only put 1 or 2 per bag, okay? Make sure that you do extensive research on the plant that you are keeping bulbs from before you do that and you know what you're doing. You're going to store them in a cool, dry place like a basement, your garage. I always kept mine out in the garage. Your ideal temperature between 35 and 45. So that's for overwintering, okay? Does that mean that you want to keep them in the attic of the garage? No, because when you dig these up, and you're going to have them up there in the attic, they are more likely to freeze. We don't want them to freeze. We want to keep them between that 35 and 45 degrees, okay? Yeah, Geoff, anything on this?
No, I'm wasted on storing bulbs. I'm learning quite a bit on this portion of it because I am familiar with in the basement, but the separation and yeah, the keeping them from freezing, that's one of those things where a garage, some garages are great for it, but others are too exposed and you could still get that. So no, this is good. I'm
Yeah,
enjoying this.
absolutely. Definitely. All right, so a lot of tinder bulbs. This is one of those slides that you probably either want to take a picture of or that you want to go back and watch for later. This slide has a lot of information for those tender, very finicky bulbs, because not all of them are super easy to do. Your tulips, your daffodils, things like that, anybody can save those. But when you get into some of these, it's a lot harder to get a successful replant after saving the bulbs, okay? If you have any tips or tricks for doing these, if you have excellent success saving your dahlias, you have excellent success saving some of these, I'm welcoming you to share your tips in the chat so we can all learn from each other. This slide has a lot of the technical information for how to get a good success rate. However, this is not the end all be all. I do not claim that this slide has every piece of information you're ever going to need. But some of the specifics that you need to know for some of these. For an example, let's see, for calla lilies, dry them for 2 to 3 weeks in a warm location, and you need to store them at a 45 to 55 degree. So you definitely don't want to put them in a freezer, or you don't want to have them being frozen. They want to stay a little bit warmer. Calla lilies are one of those that will overwinter well down in warmer climates, okay? Especially like those elephant ears, a lot of times down in Texas and places like that, they can't get rid of them. Because they overwinter so well and they just continue to grow and grow and grow. Anything here, Geoff?
Yep. So we did have a quick question. How long can you keep these bulbs? So I'm assuming 1 year is good. Can you keep them for 2 years, or is it more of a let's plant and save, plant, save, and not miss a year?
Definitely better to plant and save, plant and save. If you miss a year, you can try it. I'm not going to guarantee that it's going to work, because the longer you keep those out of the ground and the longer you keep those out of reproduction, then the more likely they are to become less viable. So the more they dry out, the more they have time to freeze and thaw and things like that, the less likely they are to actually give you a good production after you replant them. Skipping 1 year, not going to say that's the end of the world. Keeping a bulb for 5 or more years, probably not the best idea.
And for those who are watching, I probably should have said before, we'll try to get you a PDF of this presentation. So I really hope
Oh,
you
yeah,
guys weren't,
absolutely.
getting hand cramps trying to write all that down.
Yeah,
So
don't
we'll try to
try to
provide
write
that
all this.
information.
Okay. And this is, yes, I knew we would come back to stratification and things like that. So after storing, these plants specifically need cold seed stratification. Now, what stratification means is that they need some sort of awakening, okay? They need to be stratified, so they may need to be cut. They need to be beat up somehow. I'm trying to think of, the words are escaping me for stratification in itself and what you need to do to those. It basically means that those seeds need more help getting awakened than
It needs to break
what?
dormancy. Break
Yes.
dormancy.
Yes, thank you. My gosh. So they will stay dormant until they are stratified. You can keep them in and store them, but until they are stratified, they will not germinate, okay? So if you keep your milkweed or you keep things like that and you keep it, everything's great. If you don't stratify it, it's not gonna do anything. Now, that's not to say that you may not have good luck with it reseeding itself outside. A lot of times that happens. But if you're going to actually keep the seeds and plant the seeds somewhere else, that seed needs to be stratified. That seed in the natural environment is going to be stratified by nature, which sometimes happens by birds chewing them up, pooping them out, birds scratching them on the ground, animals carrying them one place or another. A lot of times that happens naturally, but stratification is important. All right, so key points and takeaways. As I said, the main thing is keep them dry, 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 dry. You need to dry all your seeds prior to your storing them, and you also need to store them in an airtight container after completely dry. Now that is seeds. Bulbs do not put in an airtight container. And then freezer is the best environment for dry storage. That does not have to be a freezer that's plugged in. A freezer that's not plugged in will also work well for this, especially if you have one that's out in your garage or is one that you're not using. It doesn't have to be frozen for this. It just means that that dry storage is going to be, that freezer has a seal all the way around it, and is going to keep them dry.
That was one thing that I had kind of messed up with was in giving this talk where I will store seeds in the refrigerator if I can, and they're pretty hardy. I try not to do the freezer because in my mind, I don't have them dry enough to where they would freeze all the way. So fridge, this is me personally, I'm more lenient towards the refrigerator. But if I can get them completely dry, then yeah, I'd do the freezer.
Yep, absolutely. That's the thing. Your freezer is best if you have them completely dry. And I say this specifically because as humans, we typically do not ever get seeds as dry as they need to be in order to be frozen. Now, professional seed storing, seed companies and things like that, they're going to freeze them, but they also have the technology and the manpower to make sure that these seeds are dry enough to freeze. And if you weren't aware, there is a seed bank, and I'm trying to remember if it's at the North Pole or the South Pole, but there is a seed bank that has a collection of seeds from all over the world, and they do keep those in frozen storage. But again, that is a professional, very scientific method, and they are making sure that they are not having any moisture, because when you have moisture inside a seed and it freezes, it's going to expand, right? Just like ice does in a container, right? And when that melts again, that introduces moisture back into the seed, and your seed is going to rot. That is why I say dry is better than cold. Dry is better than cold, okay? So keep them dry first.
And a little closer to home at Purdue University, West Lafayette, they do have the freezers where you walk into it, and it's one of the most confusing things because it's blowing dry, cold air. There's no moisture in it. So they do that for a lot of their genetic projects and make sure that they can save seeds for multiple years at a time.
Yep, absolutely. As Geoff said, you're going to get a PDF of this. So these are the links that we used to create this presentation. So, right.
Well, thank you, Abby, for doing all that. As we kind of wrap up here, we do have a few minutes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Abby is so I'm in Wabash County, the north east corner. She's way down in the southwest corner. So we love having this sort of spread with extension because we don't get to work together very often. There is a post-program survey we would like you to answer. This is just feedback. It's fun. We'd like to hear from that. We do have a few minutes for questions until the 1 o'clock hour is up. So Abby, if you're okay to stick around for a bit. Thank you.
I do want to go ahead and I'm going to apologize again for the for not being able to play the recording. I'm really hopeful that I hit all the important topics. If you do have time, go back and watch that recording, because I know Miranda had a lot of personal knowledge. She saved a ton of seeds. So make sure you go back and watch that as well. I hope I did it justice today.
It was awesome, Abby. And I will say from, Master Gardeners' point of perspective, but homesteaders, this is becoming quite a big thing to become more self-sufficient. So, no, this topic, we appreciate you being here and working with us. We will be putting information of this recording. We'll be putting the recording that was done with Abby and the other educator from 2021 in there. We'll have the PDF if you're okay with sharing that, Abby. That will be coming from Courtney Schmidt. So look for that one. The other thing is I need to mention, because you forget this, our next hot topics will be February 20th on tree pruning. Phil Woolery will be talking about that. He's an educator up here in Northern Indiana. He's a certified arborist. So come with questions. We appreciate you guys. We had a great crowd today. All the comments that you guys did in the chat box were awesome. We'll save those as well. And yeah, we just have a few more minutes for questions if you so choose. We appreciate you joining us today. And again, great talk, Abby. We love hearing about this stuff. And I'll say for me, I'm probably about 50-50 on seed savings. Honestly, I only get about 50% success rate.
Yep. I do see a comment here noting the Tipton County seed swap on January 25th. So that is awesome. Seed swaps are a great way to introduce new genetics into your garden and your operations. But yeah, always be careful and make sure that you are getting seeds that are properly labeled, and know that when you swap seeds, you don't know how that person has stored them. So definitely always check your germination and your viability before you plant them.
And then, yeah, just I'll put the post survey in again. If you guys don't mind filling that out before you log out, it helps us also figure out what demographics we're targeting, so we can make sure we're not we're covering what people like to see.
Hey, Geoff, I just
Yes.
tried to go on to that post survey, and there are some people who are having trouble accessing that post survey.
Well, darn it. Okay, well then, for the sake of keeping things easy, when we do our follow-up email, if you folks don't mind, we will put a link that just says post survey link. Access denied. Okay, well, that one's on me. Let's see. Oh, maybe if I didn't put restricted on it. It's happy 2025, everybody. Are we still recording? I'm going to go ahead and stop that.